Let me start by giving this disclaimer. The information I share in this episode on the theory of evolution is mostly from a scientific point of view and not my personal views on what I believe to be true. I would share my personal views in the episode on objections and counterarguments to this theory. This episode is to help Christian believers truly understand what the theory of evolution actually is and the current evidence that supports it. In the last episode, I mentioned that there are Christian scientists, apologists, theologians, and believers who believe God could have used the Big Bang and the process of evolution in his act of creation. This is because of the scientific research, experiments, and evidences that connect with the theory of evolution. In our ongoing series on origin, we have examined the scientific explanation for how the universe originated. If the Big Bang theory is science's best and most reliable explanation for the origin of the universe, then the theory of evolution is the best scientific explanation for the origin of life. It's important that we look at its claims and evidences before going further to discuss on the objections and counterarguments to this theory. Hey there, and welcome to AJ Sports with Ezekiel, where we do apologetics for Jesus simplified. If you are looking to grow in your faith, share what you believe, and handle hard questions with wisdom, you are in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. Listen, grow, and be edified. Let's start by defining evolution in scientific terms. According to Britannica, evolution is a biological theory that explains how different types of living organisms have developed from pre-existing forms through modification and successive generations. It's a cornerstone of modern biology, emphasizing that all living things, both plants and animals, are related by common ancestry. It's the idea that life didn't appear all at once in its final form, but gradually over billions of years. The theory of evolution deals with the study of evolutionary history and the mechanisms driving these changes. This is very important for understanding the diversity and complexity of life on Earth. The proponent of the theory of evolution, as we know, is Charles Darwin. And here's a little history to this. The reason I'm going into details on the timeline to the conception of the theory of evolution is so we can understand that Charles Darwin wasn't on vacation on the island of Galapagos. And then he saw some finches, some had straight, sharp beaks, some had curved beaks. And then he said, I have a theory. This must be evolution. No. In 1831, Charles Darwin joined the HMS Beagle. The HMS Beagle was a British Navy ship. The Beagle's main mission was to survey and map out coastlines, most especially the coastline of South America for the British Navy. Charles Darwin joined as a naturalist. These are scientists who study plants, animals, rocks, and other things related to geography. Darwin's main role was to collect specimens of plants, animals, fossils, and rocks and record observations about geology, climate, and other living things. In 1831, the HMS Beagle arrived at the Galapagos Island. Darwin noticed that animals like finches, tortoises, mockingbirds looked similar to mainland species but had unique variations depending on which island they lived on. For instance, some finches that Darwin noticed had strong, thick beaks for cracking seeds, while some other ones had slender beaks for eating insects. Darwin returned home after the voyage with thousands of specimens and notebooks. He handed over some of his bird specimens to an ornithologist named John Gould, who confirmed that the finches were different species and not just varieties of finches. These different species of finches were different in their beak shape, size, and feeding habits, and each had adapted to its island environment. Darwin decided to further his studies on his new discoveries, and he began his transmutation notebooks where he sketched out early ideas of species changing over time. In 1837, he drew his first tree of life diagram, and then later Darwin read Thomas Malthus's essay on population growth, which argued that population grows faster than food supply. And this gave Darwin the insight that competition for survival could drive natural selection, which is a key factor in the theory of evolution. The process of natural selection leads to gradual changes in species over time. In 1844, Darwin wrote a manuscript where he laid out his theory of evolution by natural selection in details. He proposed that species evolve over time through a process of natural selection where individuals with traits better suited to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. But then Darwin was cautious in publishing his manuscript because his idea was controversial and challenging to both science and religion. Darwin's idea revolutionized the understanding of the natural world, shifting from a static view of species to one of constant change and adaptation. Another British naturalist, Alfred Russel Wallace, an explorer, independently made his own observations and studies in a different part of the world and came up with similar ideas of natural selection. He wrote an essay titled "On the Tendency of Varieties to Depart Indefinitely from the Original Type." And in 1858, Alfred Wallace sent his essay to Charles Darwin. This led to Darwin's and Wallace's idea being jointly presented at the Linnean Society of London. And then in 1859, Charles Darwin published his book On the Origin of Species. Yes, that's the title, On the Origin of Species. People have misconceptions about the theory of evolution. One of them is that evolution means one species suddenly turns into another. But no, the process of evolution is gradual over billions of years. Dogs don't suddenly change to coyotes, cats don't suddenly change to tiger. No. According to science, evolution took billions of years to happen. Another misconception is that evolution says humans came from monkeys. Not exactly. Evolution says humans and monkeys share a common ancestor that existed millions of years ago. In fact, in Charles Darwin's Tree of Life diagram, he illustrates his theory that evolution is not a straight ladder, but a branching tree full of dead ends and new growths. Dead ends where some species or organisms went into extinction because they couldn't survive. And new growth where organisms that continued to survive evolved into different species. On human evolution, science says that humans didn't just appear suddenly, but as part of a long family tree that stretches back millions of years. Humans share a common ancestor with chimpanzees, baboons, existing about 6 to 7 million years ago. From that ancestor, different human-like species called hominins emerged. One of the earliest was Australopithecus that existed about 4 million years ago. They walked upright but still had small brains. Later came Homo habilis, known as the handyman, who used simple stone tools. Then Homo erectus, which is seen as one of the most successful human species. They stood tall, used fire, and spread from Africa into Europe and Asia. Another branch was the Neanderthals, who lived in colder parts of Europe and Asia. They were strong, smart, made tools, created art, and even buried their dead. And here's something amazing. Modern humans actually interbred with Neanderthals, and that's why, according to science, many people alive today still carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. Finally, about 300,000 years ago, our species, Homo sapiens, appeared in Africa, and from there humans spread across the globe, developing advanced language, culture, arts, and eventually technology. Even now, humans are developing the field of artificial intelligence. Here are some evidences supporting the theory of evolution. We start with the fossils record. Fossils are the remains or impression of prehistoric plants or animals embedded in rocks and preserved in ossified forms as bones or bony tissues. Fossils are traces of the past that gives a picture on the timeline of how life changed over time. Simpler and tiny organisms like bacteria are found in older layers of rocks, and more complex organisms like fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals are found in newer rock layers. The oldest fossil ever found is a stromatolite, a layered mound of bacteria discovered in a rock that is said to be 3.7 billion years old. It's important to note that all the fossils available don't show every step of evolution, but there are famous examples showing stages between major groups. One of such is the Archaeopteryx, which was a transitional species between birds and reptiles, and that is the earliest known bird. The oldest fossil record available is said to be 150 million years old. Another is the Tiktaalik. The Tiktaalik was a transitional animal between sea animals and land animals. It looked like a fish with limbs like fins. They are estimated to have existed about 380 to 385 million years ago. There are many other transitional animals that are based off living animals and fossils from animals that have gone extinct, which are discovered in different parts of the world. Another evidence supporting the theory of evolution is the universal genetic code. You see, every living thing, plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, and humans use the same genetic code. From DNA to RNA to proteins. DNAs are what stores the instructions for life, and they are written in a code of 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. And then RNAs are like photocopy of a gene from the DNA. Then proteins are molecules that do almost everything in the body, from building structures like muscles, skin, hair, to acting as enzymes, speeding up chemical reactions, or sending signals or defending the body. So according to science, the fact that all organisms use the same language of life strongly suggests a shared origin. DNA is the most powerful evidence today, showing that humans and chimpanzees share 98 to 99% of their DNA. However, new research studies show that percentage could be lower with significant differences in their DNA structure. Another important part about the universal genetic code is that scientists can trace family trees of organisms by comparing their genomes. This is known as comparative genomics, which is the studying of DNA across various species. And this also reveals that organisms share many similar genes. For example, humans and bacteria share genes for things like DNA replication and energy production. Another evidence that supports the theory of evolution is in embryology. According to science, in the early stages of development, embryos of different animals often look very similar. Human embryos, for example, show features that resemble gill, slits, and tails. These do not become gills or long tails in humans, but instead develop into parts of the throat, hair, and the small tailbones humans still have. This pattern is not random. It reveals a shared developmental blueprint among living things. The same genetic instructions known as Ox genes that guides early growth in fish, birds, reptiles also guides early growth in humans. Embryology then is a powerful evidence that life is connected through common ancestry. The story of evolution is not only written in fossils and DNA, but also in the early stages of growth of various species. This also leads to another evidence on comparative anatomy and shared design patterns. For instance, different species share similar body structures. This is known as homologous structures. For instance, the arm of a human, the wing of a bat, and the fin of a whale suggest they come from a common ancestor. There are also vestigial structures, which are body parts that no longer serve a major function. An example is the human appendix or the pelvic bones in whales. These are all evidence of evolutionary leftovers. One more evidence that supports the theory of evolution is observed evolution in action. Evolution is not just ancient history, but we can see it happening today. We can observe microevolution. Microevolutions are small changes within a species, like for instance having different breeds of dogs, cats, or other forms of animals. Microevolution is also evident when bacteria become resistant to antibiotics, or insects developing resistance to pesticides, or in the Galapagos, finch beaks changing with food supply. No single piece of evidence stands alone. From fossils to DNA to evidence in embryology, anatomy, and observed changes all point to the same direction. Life has a history of change and common ancestry. Evolution doesn't predict a complete record, but a consistent pattern of how life changed over time. Evolution explains how life developed and diversified. It doesn't claim to answer why life exists in the first place, or whether there is a deeper purpose behind it. So far, we have taken a first look at the theory of evolution. We have broken down what it is, cleared up some common misconceptions, and explored some of the key scientific evidences behind it. From the fossil records to similarities in anatomy and to genetics, all these pieces fit together like parts of a puzzle, giving us a scientific framework for how life may have developed and diversified over millions of years. But as we know, no theory comes without its questions and critics. In our next episode, we will turn the spotlight to some of the major objections and counter-arguments to the theory of evolution. What are the scientific challenges? What do Christians and skeptics alike raise as concerns? And how does science respond to those objections? If you have ever wondered where the theory of evolution struggles, or if there are areas it doesn't quite add up, you won't want to miss that discussion. So make sure you tune in next time as we continue on our origin series. This is AJ Sports with Ezekiel. I would see you in the next episode.